Jehanne Dubrow is the author of 3 poetry collections, including most recently Stateside. In autumn 2012, Northwestern University Press will publish her 4th book of poems, Red Army Red. Her first book, The Hardship Post, won the 3 Candles Press Open Book Award, and her 2nd collection, From the Fever World, won the Washington Writers Publishing House Poetry Competition. Finishing Line Press published her chapbook, The Promised Bride, in 2007. Her poetry, creative nonfiction, and book reviews have appeared in journals such as Southern Review, The New Republic, Poetry, Plowshares, and many others. She's been a recipient of an Individual Artists Award from the Maryland State Arts Council, a Walter E. Dakin Fellowship and Howard Nemeroff Poetry Scholarship from the Sewanee Writers Conference, and a Soslin Foundation Fellowship from the Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. The daughter of American diplomats, Jehanne Dubrow was born in Italy and grew up in Yugoslavia, Zaire, Poland, Belgium, Austria, and the United States. She lives on the eastern shore of Maryland, where she serves as the interim director of the Rose O'Neill Literary House and is an assistant professor in creative writing and literature at Washington College. In her spare time, she sometimes teaches classes at the Writers Center in Bethesda, Maryland. So, a few words about the poems. In one of the poems from Stateside, the speaker asks, how did the Greeks learn beauty from that sudden turn we call catastrophe? The author's answer to that question shows an awareness that catastrophe was first a literary term, denoting the downturn at the end of a tragedy, and that the beauty found there is embedded in the strophe of catastrophe, that is, in the spiraling, ever-turning chorus or stanza of the very poem wherein we find the question. Like the venom of an asp, the poem enacts catastrophe and is at the same time its antidote. In Stateside, the catastrophe of war and separation becomes, in the poet's hands, an unflinching series of short narratives and meditations in which the poet, like the Greeks before her, marries the terrible and the beautiful. In Sea Change, it's the name of one of the poems, in Sea Change, the ocean can polish a glass shard into a jewel. At the same time, it peels back the keel of an aircraft carrier from bow to stern. And in Against War movies, heroic Hollywood productions serve merely as grim reminders of a military wife's worst fears. Even language itself is given a grotesque turn as security becomes a synonym for bereavement, and essential equipment means bringing with you the things for which you care the least. What I find most remarkable about these poems is how Dubrow uses poetic form as a kind of restraint and counterweight against the anxiety that might otherwise overwhelm the poems. Robert Frost has a clever little epigram which comes to mind. He says, let chaos storm, let cloud-shaped swarm, I wait for form. The forms of Dubrow's poems, while allied and inseparable from the content of the poems, nevertheless pose a paradox, since the outward display of control only heightens the sense of catastrophe brewing within. Like Penelope's daily work on the loom, these poems are tapestries, solid in their finished form. But even as we follow their warp and woof down the page, we know that beneath the form lies the danger that everything all at once may come undone. Please welcome Jehanne Dubrow.
Thanks, Matt. That was wonderful. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Well, this is my first time reading at a school that has, as a part of its mission, a Christ-centered focus. And so I was extremely nervous coming here. But everyone's been so nice and so lovely, and not that I'm surprised. I have normally kind of a salty mouth, so I'm going to try to be very good. Because who knows who's watching? So I'm going to read from my 3rd collection of poetry, Stateside, which is about my experiences as a military wife. My husband is career Navy, and the book looks at the experience of surviving a deployment through the before, during, and the after, and explores the emotional journey of the military spouse waiting for her beloved to return from war. So many of the poems in Stateside take their titles from military terminology. I found it really rewarding while I was writing the book to ask my husband for interesting pieces of military terminology and to then find the poetry in that military language. So this opening poem takes its title from a military expression, secure for sea. It means the movable stays tied, lockers hold shut. The waves don't slide a metal box across the decks or scatter screws like jacks. The sea, a rebellious child that wrecks all tools which are unfastened tightly or fixed. At home we say secure when what we mean is letting go of him. And even if we're sure he's coming back, it's hard to know. The farther out a vessel drifts, will contents stay in place or shift? As I'm reading, you may hear a little bit of rhyme, a little bit of meter. I'm a big fan of tradition, and as Matt said, I think that tradition is especially valuable when trying to speak about really difficult emotional subjects. So this is Assateague Island, March. We toss our coffee on the sand, watching the liquid sink and fade to almost nothing, like disappearing ink. The wind disturbs our tent flap, jostles the poles, sways the frame, so that I hope we cannot stay the night. Why don't we leave, I ask. He shakes his head, and in my borrowed sleeping bag I lie awake, shiver beneath its summer weight, curl myself into a question mark. I listen for hours to the pace of waves, an irritant like sand inside a shoe. He always shuts his eyes before I do. He's slumped in front of the TV or pinned by an open book across his chest. And here, surrounded by the racket nature makes, he rests, so deep asleep, I don't exist. At 8 a.m. we stand, roll up our beds. I couldn't sleep at all, he says. Too cold, though you seemed fine. I laugh. To think of all those hours I listened to his breath, and he to mine. The air, a frozen wing, the wild ponies snuffling for food. God damn our domesticity. At least we should side the other's mane, or rub together, try burning like two broken sticks. This next poem, you're going to hear a kind of repetition, which I hope will be like the sea. The poem comes from a French form called the triolet, and it includes interlocking rhymes and repeating lines that hopefully, as the repetitions happen, evolve and change with each new repetition. This is O Dark Hundred, and the term O Dark Hundred means very late at night or very early in the morning. O Dark Hundred. This is the hour that writers eulogize. Midnights, when my husband guards his post against monotony. Before sunrise, this is the hour that writers eulogize. In port, a sentry walks the deck, replies, all conditions normal, surveys the coast. This is the hour that writers eulogize. Midnights, when my husband guards his post. I can imagine that he faces west, the sky like a purple sail above the sea. Somewhere a buoy creaks, waves shrink and crest, and I imagine him. He faces west to stand and watch and wait alone, the rest of the crew asleep in the machinery. I can imagine him. He's facing west, the sky a purple sail above the sea. My words are just reflections from the shore, and the page imperfect mirror of his ship, where white lights blink above each metal door. My words are just reflections. On the shore, there's radio silence, No talk of war, only the sound of nothing, only the blip of words reflecting distantly from shore, and the page imperfect mirror of his ship. So one time I read that poem, and a student afterwards said to me, "That poem is kind of boring." And I said, "Yeah, so standing watch." So that's an example of the way form and content should mirror one another. The poem is trying to describe something extremely tedious and boring. And so in some ways, it is extremely tedious and boring. So this next poem takes its title from the military phonetic alphabet. Do you guys know what that is? So alpha is A, Bravo is B. And this poem is titled Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Anyone know what that means? Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Foxtrot the Navy, I yell into the phone. The first time that my husband roams deployed, a word we've waited for since war began 4 years ago. Let whiskey slide as slow as bullets down my throat. Let foxtrot be both verb and noun. Foxtrot the Navy, I say again, but softer than before, as if the whisper of the dance could keep him here. I need a shot of whiskey just to take the news, a song in 2/4 time and rhinestone shoes. Foxtrot, I sigh, third time's the charm in everything but war, oh ugly, big sublime. Call in the dancing girls, the boys who swallow slugs from jerry cans, moonshine sloshed to the brim of each canteen. Let whiskey taste toxic as benzene. I think most military spouses will tell you that no matter how much you're prepared for a deployment, your reaction when you hear about a deployment is always anger. And it's hard sometimes not to respond to anger with obscenity. Non-essential equipment. The dog and I are first among those things that will not be deployed with him. Forget civilian clothes as well. He shouldn't bring too many photographs, which might get wet. The face is blurred. He only needs a set of uniforms. Even his wedding ring gives pause. What if it fell? He'd be upset to dent or scratch away the gold engraving. The sea bag must be light enough to sling across its shoulder, each canvas pocket empty of regret. The trick is packing less. No wife, no pet, no perfumed letters dabbed with I love yous, or anything he can't afford to lose. So that's a sonnet. And I always say that sonnets are great for speaking about anger, because they're very small and they only give you so much room to vent. We only have 14 lines. This is another sonnet against war movies. I see my husband shooting in Platoon, and there he is again in MASH. How weird to hear him talk like Hawkeye Pierce. And soon I spot him everywhere. His body smeared with mud, his face bloodied. He's now the star of every ship blockade and battle scene. The Fighting 69th, A Bridge Too Far, Three Kings, Das Boot, and Stalag 17. In Stalingrad he's killed, and then he's killed in Midway and A Few Good Men. He's burned or gassed, he's shot between the eyes, or shoots himself when he comes home again. Each movie is a training exercise, a scenario for how my husband dies. Everybody please silence your phones. So that's an example of what a sonnet can allow you to do. Because we would never say that in polite society, right? We would never say, when I watch war movies, I start to weep because I keep imagining my husband dead, right? Can you imagine somebody coming up to you on the street and saying that? You think, who's this crazy person? But in a poem, you can talk about the things that you're most terrified of. So this is the last poem in the opening section of the book, and it's that last moment right before the loved one leaves for war. Reading Stephen Crane's War is Kind to my husband. I packed your sea bag today. 6 pairs of pants, shirts folded in the rigid squares, your socks balled up like tan grenades. I put my photo in as well, laid it there between the Kevlar vest and heap of clothes. Don't weep, the poet warns. Don't weep. On 60 Minutes, a soldier turns his face toward us, shows the camera his burns, small metal slivers still embedded in the skin, his mouth a scrap of ragged tin. The young man's face was beautiful before, smooth, unblemished as my own. For war is kind, I read. Great is the battle god, and great the auguries, the firing squad, the sickly green of night vision that cuts the darkness open at the seams, gutted and spilling on the sand. Great is the Glock, the Aegis combat system, the Black Hawk circling. Great are the K-bar fighting knives, the shells that sing through air as though alive. And if you've never had a chance to read Stephen Crane's very great poem, I highly recommend it. It's a highly ironic treatment of the praise of war. So the middle section of Stateside moves to the during. What happens while the beloved is away at war? And when I'm writing a collection, I often do a lot of research to see what's been written on a subject before. And in writing about Stateside, I wanted to see what had been written by or about the military wife in the past. And what I discovered is that the military wife is an almost unrepresented character in literature, as opposed to the soldier, who's a constant figure in literature, throughout the history of Western literature, beginning, of course, with Homer. And in fact, it was Homer who showed me the only real and interesting figure of a military wife in literature, and that's Penelope, waiting for Odysseus to return. And those of you who know the Odyssey will, of course, remember that Penelope waits 20 years for Odysseus to return. First 10 years with the Trojan War, and then Odysseus makes his leisurely way back to Italy, stopping on the way for a wild music here and there. So I wanted to update the story of Penelope and explore what would it mean to be Penelope in the 21st century, and why was this a problematic role model for a real woman living in the United States in this decade. So the poems in the middle section are written in the voice of a modern-day Penelope, going to the mall, getting her hair cut, going on a diet. This is Ithaca. There's war beyond the shores, but here there's Dairy Queen and Taco Bell, the Westfield shopping mall, the cell phone superstore, Home Depot, Sears. And home remains a metaphor for something else, a wife who tries to guard her chastity, ties it like a yellow ribbon to her door, sticks it to the bumper of her car so that her neighbors know she sleeps alone, almost a widow to the Trojan War, like some dessert too beautiful to taste. At PTA meetings, she's chased by divorcees and other glum suitors. Nobody seems to care that she still wears a wedding ring. Odysseus is gone. Same thing as being dead. And so men stare at her when she buys groceries or takes the dog out for a pee. She's Ithaca, trapped in her own body, an island circled by the sea. And this is Penelope's stateside. On an island called America, start fantasizing with the sex you had with him. Go shop for bras and lacy thongs at the PX, black garters, bustiers, a cream that leaves your body woven silk, a self-help book for self-esteem, a bag of M&Ms, skim milk to keep you thin, and lean cuisine you hate to cook for one. Or buy a pair of True Religion jeans, the denim pressing on each thigh so that there's no sensation but blue fabric like a second skin, no lover's touch more intimate than the zipper pressing in. But don't forget, he may come home so torn that purchases won't mean a thing. Not the Posturepedic foam pillow top mattress or the sateen duvet. He won't be satisfied by eiderdowns or bedspreads sewn by hand, still numb because he's stateside and dreaming of the combat zone. So I read that poem at the Naval Academy. I did a reading for about 2,000 students. And after I finished that poem, all the Marines in the audience all went, ooh-ah, right? I guess they thought it was really saucy to think about poor Penelope all by herself. And this is Penelope Considers a New Do. The magazines declare, don't ever cut your hair just after breaking up. So what if he's been absent nearly 20 years? Fact is, each day the loss feels new. The shears still biting as the first time they've been honed. Looks like he's never coming back. You've moaned for 2 decades about the shroud of bangs which veils your face, the way your ponytail hangs down your back like a ragged piece of rope. Your follicles have given up all hope of hair that moves. A Farrah Fawcett's flip, Meg Ryan's shag, or anything so hip as the pixie, the asymmetric bob. Go see the stylist to the stars and sob your story out. That endless Trojan War, those gods. Andre has heard it all before. He'll trim away dead ends, so razor fast. Chop, chop, snip, snip. You'll wonder why the past cannot be sliced so easily away, or dyed a golden shade to hide the gray. When I published this poem, Farrah Fawcett was still alive, and Meg Ryan didn't look like an alien. So now I kind of feel the need to revise the poem. Poor Meg Ryan, remember when she was so adorable? Yeah. Sad. So if you move to the third part of the collection, it's the return. And to me, the third part is in some ways the most interesting one because we all have such romantic notions of homecoming. We all imagine that when the soldier comes back, the two lovers are reunited and everything is exactly as it was before. But the fact is that people change, right? One person has been changed by war and the other person has been changed by solitude. And although it's deeply uncomfortable, I think to address what happens when physical distance is eliminated and emotional distance remains, it's terribly dishonest if we don't talk about it. So the opening poem in the last section is called Enophilia, which means love of wine. Those months away from you, I teach myself to cook with wine, admiring the change a Beaujolais enjoys inside the pot, its sly divestment of alcohol, slowly from the heat, like a girl unbuttoning her blouse. I'm indiscriminate. All reds will do because you've never had a taste for white. The frigid Chardonnay or Pinot Gris so chilled it makes the crystal goblet sweat. You're loyal to the glass of claret light. I'm talking warmth and things that need to breathe before they're sipped. The old varietals, picked and stomped on, a purple bruise, delicious for its pain, the grape skins, shredded gauze. And so I plan a week of meals that are a lesson in desiring, like Tristan und Isolde, where consummation never comes, and booze is an excuse for letting loose again. Again, the bottle spilling liquid from its open mouth, the green neck sticky there, our tongues discovering the mantle tannins, and something close to blood, but sweeter. I'm wondering if that guy in the back is texting me. And this is on the erotics of deployment. I'll build an altar to the tiny flecks fallen from his razor, the pair of coveralls crumpled near the bed, the history of war he left unread. The goddess of impermanence will be evicted from my home. In her absence, I will exhibit art composed of my vestigial parts, my breasts the centerpiece to this display. I will be all of Greece and Italy. I will forget about my skin and the awful need for friction, how often I'm an empty plate. Or else I won't won't forget, but only tolerate neglect. Some wives prefer to wait along the pier, green glitter on their eyes, their bodies wrapped in scarlet. I'll try to be the harlot that I want to be, Bathsheba gleaming on the balcony, Susanna combing tangles from her hair. I will prepare myself for him, a feast, a holy sacrifice. I'll be the fruit kept edible on ice. And every time I read that poem, I say edible instead of edible, which makes it an entirely different poem altogether. So this is situational awareness, which is a concept in the military, and situational awareness is exactly what it sounds like. It's the idea that being aware of your environment is a highly important skill to have if you're in the military, and can potentially mean the matter between life and death. Situational awareness. These past few weeks, I'm more than just aware of where he is. I'm hypersensitive, stretched thin as a length of wire, a hair trigger mechanism. Nothing can live near me. I twitch each time the telephone rings through the dark, so like a warning bell. I want to run from it, escape the green zone of this house. Who says that war is hell? Well, waiting can be worse. Show me a guy shipped overseas, and I'll show you a wife who sees disaster dropping from the sky. The ambush always comes. Her husband's life, a road of booby traps and blind spots made to hide the rock, the shell, the thrown grenade. So clearly one of the central concerns of this book is the problem of having a good imagination. If you're blessed with a good imagination as I am, it means that you're very skilled at imagining disaster. And this is the title poem of the book, Stateside. If there is such a thing as elasticity, then we are stretched nearly to the breaking. The weight becomes my pulse. Come home, come home. Day 8, day 9, day 10, day 63. When he comes home, our miles increase. The band pulled taut between our separate points. Before we're released, made slack again. We almost don't belong inside the same time zone, much less this house. He's spouse instead of lover, stateside instead of overseas. I feel myself withdrawing from his hand, a touch I want, but barely understand. And that poem takes as its inspiration the very beautiful poem by John Donne of Valediction, Forbidding Morning. I hope some of you have read that poem. In it, the poet compares the separated lovers to the parts of a compass that are separated and then brought back together. And of course, one of his points in the poem is that it's the guy who gets to be the moving part of the compass while the woman remains fixed and permanent. And that was one of the things I wanted to investigate in this book, was the question of whether it was really my duty to remain fixed and unchanging while my husband got to have adventures. My husband is what's known as a surface warfare officer, which means he doesn't work on a submarine and he doesn't fly planes. He works on ships. So this is surface warfare. Our arguments move across the surfaces of things. Smooth, flat areas where silence floats for weeks. The rule, whoever speaks first loses. If he patrols the living room, then I control our bed, an Atlantic filled with my insomnia, the quilts too thick to wade through. Some nights I think drowning would be easier, and drink mouthfuls of salt. No shallows here, only the fathoms of marriage, and we are anchored side by side, the darkness wide, percussive as a mine. Just going to read 2 more poems because you're all looking a little giddy. I've numbed you into submission with my poems. All part of my dastardly plan. Ha-ha. So this is the first poem that I wrote when I moved to my current home in Maryland, the Eastern Shore, and it's called aptly enough, Eastern Shore. Talking about distance is a way to close the space. Consider the bridge that curves above the Chesapeake, which when we mention it, becomes a child's toy. Or that the Beltway is not a contest of families wrapped in steel, speeding toward collision, demanding it, but just a road that circles on itself. Remember when we touched at 22, so willingly aligned in one twin bed, your spine pressed up against the wall, and mine about to break over the edge. These days, we're greedy in our king, spread wide, although we barely scrape together in our sleep. We're isolates with only water in between. Closeness used to say, closing your arms around me like a measurement of rope. We fell asleep to Billie Holiday, a long, sad looping of her voice that warned, not everyone is lucky in this world. And I remember when you dressed for work, how I hated watching as you tied each shoe, the tight finality of laces, cinched bows. It's been a while since I said the buttons on your shirt reminded me of afternoons and evenings spent in bed, hours now indistinct as the facing shore, our backs like metal arches, our words moving from mouth to caverned mouth and mouth again, the river of our bodies murmuring. And that poem is based on, or inspired by one of my favorite poems from the 20th century. It's a poem by the still living poet Robert Haas called Meditation at Lagunitas, and it's one of the great poems of the last 30 years, so go out and read it. So this is the final poem in the book, and it begins with a line from the great World War I poet Siegfried Sassoon. And this is Shabbat prayer on the occasion of war. Does everyone know what Shabbat is? Shabbat prayer on the occasion of war. A flare went up, the shining whiteness spread, as though it were a match bright enough to light the room, but not so bright it snuffed the residue of darkness overhead. There once was darkness signifying calm. Our candles glowed beside the windows. The nights did not explode, or bullets ricochet, or firebombs turn streets to ash. We drank a glass of wine. The night served as a complement to day, like salt on something sweet. And in this way, we tasted syrup mixed with brine. And in this way, we learned a prayer that joined the shadow with the shining flare.
So we do have time for questions. We can take maybe 5 or 10 minutes, or as many questions as we have. It's always the first question is always the awkward. Somebody want to leap out there? Christy?
So I'm interested in your apprenticeship in formal poetry. Just how you made that journey, what was useful to you, what you would recommend to others who want to do that.
Okay, so did everyone hear the question? It was my apprenticeship in formal poetry and how I made that journey. I went to the great book school. I went to St. John's College, which is classical education. And so I spent 4 years reading poets who were working in what were the music of their day. You know, I read a tremendous amount of Shakespeare and, Milton for blank verse. And so it was very natural that later on when I was thinking about being a poet, that the poets I was drawn to were those ones working in form. And I also started out in the theater and loved classical theater. And there's no better way to learn the music of meter than to memorize, right? And in fact, students, you guys used to, you didn't have it, but 2 generations ago, people in school had to memorize a lot of poems starting from the time that they were very young. And it meant that everybody who had a basic education knew what pentameter sounds like. What does iambic pentameter sound like? Yeah, it sounds like horses. Da-dun, 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 right? It sounds like a heartbeat. But you ask that nowadays, and you guys are a really educated, well-educated group of people, but most people aren't going to know what that music sounds like. So I was very fortunate that I had this classical education, and then in the years after college, while I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I was writing every day, and I was telling a class earlier today that for a year I wrote a sonnet every day. And they were really bad sonnets. And each one was in the voice of a character from Greek mythology. And there was one about, is it Daphne who turns into a tree? And the ending couplet of the poem was, I do not think of sex as immoral, I simply prefer to be a laurel. It was really bad. I mean, thank goodness no one ever published it. But that was great practice for hearing that music to the point where most people, when they're starting out working in rhyme and meter, have to count. And that's very useful, but there's a certain point at which you don't have to do that anymore. If you have, I love your word, apprentice yourself. So, I mean, I think the best recommendations, if you're interested in writing in form, is first off to start memorizing. And that doesn't just mean that you have to memorize old dead guys. There are a lot of contemporary poets working in traditional form, but it's really important to start internalizing those musics. And then just to practice. I mean, especially, again, I was saying this in a class earlier today, there are certain forms that you can write a fantastic poem the first time you try them out. Like the villanelle is a great beginner's luck poem. But the sonnet is a poem that you really have to sort of dedicate your time to in order to get the sense of how the piece works. That's it?
Have you gotten response from other military wives to your poetry? Has it really struck a chord with them?
Yeah, I mean, poetry is a really hard sell, as evidenced by the Exodus. No, I'm kidding. I know you guys have long days. It's a hard sell, and so it was initially quite difficult to get people to want to read the book because they're poems, and everyone hates poetry in America. Not everyone, but a tiny, tiny percentage. And so trying to convince people, if you read this, maybe you will find you don't read poetry as much as you thought you did, was a challenge. But I've gotten great feedback from military wives who are excited that somebody is voicing their experience. Because military wives have historically been silent and have been expected to remain silent so as not to be viewed as unpatriotic or so as to not risk damaging their husbands' careers. And there's still a rhetoric, as I'm sure many of you know, in the American military, that even saying this is a really difficult kind of life to live is viewed as sort of wishy, like what's wrong with you? You're a big wimp. How dare you complain? And so even stating the obvious, that of course this is a life of loneliness, and that surprise, surprise, when recent studies were done, it was discovered that military spouses, while alone on deployments, had increased levels of mental illness. Loneliness is bad for you, right? Solitude can have an effect on your health. But even a revelation like that, which seems, I would think, self-evident to most people, was shocking. And that's because the military is a culture of silence. In part because they're trying to be so macho, and apparently to be manly in this country means to not express your feelings. At least that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I'm interested in how you see your poetry in connection to war poetry and war literature, because in some ways the last 50 years there's been this massive outpouring of American literature dominated by war. First Vietnam, and then of course more recently Iraq, Afghanistan, the whole thing. I think you're right, and I've heard these voices before, right? The references to war was more war movies and popular culture things, and the references to literature were 19th century or beyond.
Yeah.
I'm interested as far as what you think about contemporary war literature, and do you relate to any of that stuff or read any of that stuff?
Sure, I mean, I teach a class well, especially in war poetry of the 20th and 21st centuries. And it's interesting to see which wars have produced literature and which haven't. So, for instance, the Korean War is strangely quiet and strangely uncanonized. The first Gulf War, not much was produced. Everybody knows Anthony Swofford's book, right? But that's almost about it. So I don't know why it is that the book mostly touches upon classical literature. Other than that, I wanted to in some ways place myself in the canon, right? Step up to the table. But you know, I think there's really interesting writing being produced about the war. I will say that the end of the draft profoundly changed the way American literature deals with the war, and that it used to be much more common for us to see soldier poets or soldier novelists than it now is. You know, Richard Wilbur, one of the great American poets, or Anthony Hecht, and you know, pretty much any novelist that you can think of from the mid-20th century. But as a result of the end of the draft, which I'm not complaining about, but I'm saying it has had an impact on the way our world literature looks and sounds now. There are many fewer soldier poets now. I can think of two. So it's interesting to think about what that says about our current American military, and perhaps the question of, are we not supporting them or providing them with the necessary education to pursue the arts that they want to afterwards? Because the GI Bill was a tremendous opportunity to provide young soldiers with educations that then led them to be some of the most influential art makers in this country. And the GI Bill has been largely gutted at this point. I mean, the money that you now get as a soldier to go to school is pathetic. So we're not supporting our soldiers in the same way that we were when there was a draft. Okay, that was an amazing question. The question was about our commitment to sort of giving our soldiers art as an output, and our diminishing commitment to that, and simultaneously the increasing numbers of suicides in the U.S. military. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I've worked with wounded warriors, and a few months ago I was talking to a therapist who works at Walter Reed, who essentially started a movement to introduce the arts into military treatment centers. And he said to me that in the wards, the suicide rate among soldiers was about 25%. And I said, wow, that seems kind of high. And I said, were there comparable numbers in World War I with all those shell-shocked guys? And he said, not even close. I mean, the numbers were not even close. And of course, the reason is because the battle rhythm has changed. I was telling students earlier today that now you can look at a soldier who may be 5 years into his career and may have as many deployments under his belt as a soldier who, you know, was in for 20 years. Because they're just sending the soldiers out so frequently with such tiny gaps between them. And so all of a sudden, as a result of these shocking suicide numbers, the military has suddenly started thinking, should we be giving them yoga classes or acupuncture or art? And so all of a sudden, the military is using art therapy, music, especially music is really, really useful, but also the visual arts and the verbal arts as ways of giving these soldiers voices. And I don't know if those treatments are going to lead to actual art, but I would think they will lead to wholer human beings. It's such an important issue.